September 10th, a significant and unprovoked terrorist attack by Russia occurred at the busy Warsaw airport. This serious incident involved more than 30 Russian drones and various missiles, which were launched and attacked the sovereign nation of Poland, causing considerable concern and damage. Warsaw, Rzeszów, Lublin, and Modlin were under attack. Explosions, panic, evacuation. Airports are paralyzed, thousands of passengers are stranded on the ground. The Prime Minister of Poland, he urgently convened the government. This is the first case of Russian missiles and drones striking a residential building in Poland. This is not a provocation, this is an act, an aggression.
Breaking news, friends, it's September 10th, and this is a shocking situation. Mass panic in Europe. War has come. Russia has attacked Poland. During the night, a missile and more than 30 Russian kamikaze drones reportedly entered Polish airspace, causing concern. One of them struck a residential building in Poland. It is almost completely destroyed. 4 airports have been closed: Warsaw, Rzeszów, Lublin, and Modlin. F-16s, F-35s, and Nato reconnaissance aircraft have been scrambled. Polish military officials declare this an act of aggression against a NATO country. Today, Europe woke up in panic. Russian actions have paralyzed airports within 500 kilometers of Warsaw. Thousands of passengers are stranded on the ground. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has convened an emergency government meeting. This is the first time Russian drones and missiles have struck a residential building in Poland. The situation is unprecedented. Russia is once again testing Poland's resilience. Poland is in flames, Europe is in panic. Trump comments from a restaurant.
Mr. President, what is Russia's response? And Russian drones over Poland.
But is NATO ready to respond? We will discuss all this right now with the well-known journalist, Dmitry Gordonov.
Hello, Dasha. Hello, dear viewers. Of course, it is indeed an interesting and noteworthy fact that such a significant number of drones have reportedly entered the sovereign territory of our close and brotherly nation, Poland. First of all, I immediately asked myself a question. Did the Russians send them on purpose? Or was it an accident? We're not so naive as to believe in coincidences. Of course, it's not a coincidence. These are drones that deliberately entered Poland. Why are the Russians doing this? Next question. I genuinely believe that they simply want to provoke the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, commonly known as NATO. They particularly do not like the people of Poland, of course, and their actions reflect this sentiment. To deliberately provoke the Poles and NATO. And as another viable option, they probably want to launch a strike at the Polish infrastructure that effectively transfers crucial NATO weapons and supplies to Ukraine. Now, the next point. I am truly glad that this particular event has happened, and I am very pleased about it. I'm glad. Perhaps I shouldn't articulate this, but I am merely being forthright and transparent about my genuine thoughts and perceptions, because this specific situation or action will undoubtedly compel both Poland, a significant nation in the region, and its vital allies, particularly the member countries of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization known as NATO, to respond decisively and with substantial measures. Now, let's proceed to examine the crucial question. Precisely how will this development effectively push them to react in such a manner? And what could the response be? Honestly, I want to say it again. Russians are idiots. I mean, you're at war with Ukraine. You're already getting bogged down, so to speak, by the rules of the genre. You're fighting Ukraine and trying to somehow finish it off. But no, they're now sending their drones into Poland, thereby creating extra problems for themselves. I'm just reasoning from the outside here. Now let's move on to the question, what can NATO do in this situation? This is the most interesting question. Poland, let me remind you, is a country with $1 trillion economy, already among the top 20 economies in the world. Poland is a country that has achieved tremendous success. Poland is a country within the American and British spheres of influence. Well, now let's gather the initial reactions. The first reactions are still very timid, so Macron expressed deep concern. Your gestures confirm it. You say more without words than I do with words. I wonder, how can I learn to do that too? Now, the Poles themselves aren't speaking very clearly either, but more than 20 drones entered your territory. 23, according to reports. That's not a small number. Listen, that's an attack. That's an attack on sovereign Poland. 23 drones. One of them fell on a house. Well, that's not acceptable. This is already a serious problem. So let's wait for Trump's statement. Once he wakes up,
Dmitry says there was no statement because he was sitting in a restaurant. Yes, he stepped out
to the restaurant and people started asking him these questions. He didn't answer a single question and went straight to his car. Well, maybe he doesn't have the necessary information yet and needs to consult with his advisors and consultants. So let's break it down like this. Simply put, you always have to start from the basics. If drones were to fly in, yes, as the Polish leaders have explicitly stated, and also a significant number of leaders from various other countries have affirmed that this particular incident is not an intentional act of war, but rather it just happened to inadvertently fly in like that. Of course, it is certainly not a formal declaration of war, but when only one drone flies in, or perhaps two, or even a maximum of three, you can reasonably say it's merely an unfortunate accident. But when 23 fly in, guys, there are no such coincidences. That's a pattern, don't confuse it.
10. Where did 23 come from? Apparently, I missed something while I was preparing. According
to my information, 23 flew in.
So that's much more than what Zelensky officially announced. Zelensky said 10. He knew
about 10. He knew about 10. So as of now, everyone is saying at least 23.
Incredible.
I'll tell you, even 10 is really a lot.
Of course.
And 23 is just way too many. So to maintain simplicity, let's consider option 1. They might simply choose to let the situation slide entirely and completely refrain from any form of reaction or response whatsoever. Neither NATO nor the Americans. Well, that's a bad option. That means Russia is being given carte blanche to do whatever it wants. By the way, only 4 drones were shot down. 3 or 4 out of 19, as was reported in the morning, and now they're saying at least 23. Well, that's a poor interception rate, I must say. So the Russians have tested the Poles. Turns out the Poles can't shoot down drones. And since the Poles can't shoot down drones, that means this Russian success should be replicated and scaled up. And they're basically saying, you better watch out. So far, it's just drones, but we can use missiles too.
Missiles will come next, Dmitry Ilyich.
Of course. That's why I think we've now reached a moment of truth. Either they'll be shown who's boss in no uncertain terms, or they'll just put up with it. But I think that's a terrible option, just terrible. I don't believe in that outcome.
But I do.
Yes, and you believe that's how it should be.
I've put up with 200% already, and I believe that Moscow will attack Europe next, and soon, because they'll simply realize there won't be any reaction except for deep concern. NATO's statement, in my opinion, is already saying that this isn't an attack on Poland, it's just an accident. How many more missiles will they swallow? I don't know. Dmitry Ilyich. When it will actually be considered an attack for them remains an open question.
Dasha, most importantly, don't worry. You need to stay calm. So I want to tell you that there are 2 options. Either NATO will stand up to its full height now, or they'll swallow it. In any case, Russia is playing with fire. Well, in any case, they're playing with fire. And here's where it gets interesting, what Trump is saying. Trump says that the US is ready to go 100% against Russia and to impose sanctions against China if the Europeans agree to it, who, let me remind you, are still buying Russian energy resources worth about 21 billion euros. 21 billion euros, I want to tell you, is a lot of money for a war. You can wage war with that kind of money. So is Trump right when he says that? Yes. I'll tell you why. Look, I'm not idealizing Trump, I repeat. I'm not a Trump fan. I'm a fan of logic. Logically, he's saying, guys, the war is at your doorstep. I'm ready to help you, but you should also help yourselves. In other words, give up that money you love so much. We'll also give up some money. Let's teach Russia a lesson, but together. So you should bear some of the costs too. You want us to be the only ones bearing them. It doesn't work that way. Let's do it together. Trump is speaking logically. Yes, it's logical. Will the Europeans go for it? I don't know. Let's see. I think today was a turning point in the war. A turning point. I don't believe that Europe and America will swallow these drones over Poland. I don't believe it. I mean, I allow for anything. After all, we've seen everything already. Anything can be allowed, whatever it is. But to believe in it, no, I don't believe it. I think there will be a very appropriate response.
And as for Russia against Poland, that's an act of war. Congressman, Republican, and member of the U.S. Armed Services Committee, Joe Wilson, called on Trump to respond with mandatory sanctions. So statements are already coming out. This is an act of aggression, an unprecedented violation of the airspace of a country by the armed forces of Poland. But NATO has responded officially. This is not an act of aggression. They do not consider this an act of aggression. So it turns out that the Polish armed forces and NATO have different points of view. NATO is just an abbreviation. In other words, it's all talk and no action. If we're talking about NATO, most likely NATO won't react to this in any way at all. What we're talking about, sanctions, Dmitry Ilyich, that's not a NATO response at all. There should be a NATO response after all. Let's remember how Recep Tayyip Erdogan shot down a plane that crossed from Russian airspace into Turkey.
I just remembered an old crude joke, but I'll tell it anyway. I'm walking through Yerevan. I feel like someone is looking back at me, but it turns out it's me. That's exactly what could happen to NATO if they keep acting this way. The main thing is not to walk around Yerevan.
What's your take on the situation? What could be the consequences of this drone incident, as they like to call it in Poland? They always call it a drone incident.
You know, they called it a drone incident when there was only 1 or 2 drones. Now it's impossible to brush off the fact of a mass incursion of drones into the territory of sovereign Poland. You know, 1 or 2 drones might go off course. Well, let's allow for that possibility. Sure, a couple might go off course, but 23 going off course, excuse me, but that's hard to believe. So in any case, there needs to be a response. If they respond weakly, the Russians will just laugh, and next time they'll send 50 drones or even a few missiles. Because the Russians act methodically. If something works, they keep pushing. Did it work? They push again, they push again. It works. They push again. That's how they operate. But if you push back right away, they back off. I'll even tell you this. I sometimes vividly remember this particular event. The former Prime Minister of Crimea, Anatoly Vladimirovich Mogilev, personally told me that when the little green men first appeared and our people diligently intercepted their communications, it was a significant moment. The conversations went like this. A day to secure the position. If it works out, great. If not, we pull back. That's the entire Russian tactic. It hasn't changed for centuries. You just need to understand it. Did we push through? It worked. Then we keep pushing. If not, we pull back. That's it. And only understands the language of force. This language is always perfectly understood.
Mitrik, they've already analyzed Poland's behavior and NATO's behavior for you. So, first of all, Reuters made a statement that NATO does not consider the incident with Russian drones in Poland to be an attack. Next, the Polish Prime Minister. This is also an official statement. It was not an attack on Poland, but a large-scale provocation. We are in consultations with our allies. There is no reason to panic. Life will continue as usual. Next, the first official NATO reaction. Many drones entered Polish territory. We intercepted them. NATO headquarters is consulting and continues consultations, close ones, with Warsaw. But I won't be harsh. Everyone already knows our tough stance regarding the North Atlantic Alliance. absolute total impotence. Frankly, I think Russia could easily and quickly occupy any European NATO member state, while everyone else is busy holding consultations. Well, I'd like to ask you, Dmitrievich, sorry. Well, excuse me.
Dasha, I think today the capitals of the Baltic states are really on edge, I believe.
Dmitrievich, I'm sure that if Russia decides to invade, at that very moment, NATO will be holding consultations. You remember that before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, NATO had an article that allowed them to hold consultations for several days while a NATO member state was being occupied. Yes?
The fourth one, I think.
Yes, so occupation is allowed to happen during that time while they're holding consultations and so on. You see, Dmitrievich, it turns out that all NATO is capable of at this point is repelling attacks. So are we understanding this correctly? Today I discussed this with many colleagues, that the strategy of the Poles and other NATO member countries on whose territory missiles and drones will be flying in is simply to defend themselves against these missiles and drones. So there is no plan for any demonstrative military strike against Russia. They will just defend themselves.
Well, they might not carry out strikes against Russia. I would advise them not to strike Russia. I would advise them to give Ukraine long-range missiles as soon as possible. We can handle it ourselves, both for them and for ourselves. We'll carry out all the strikes ourselves and hit all the targets ourselves. Let them provide the missiles. So ideally for us, the best response to Russian drones penetrating the territory of Europe, the European Union and NATO would be to supply excellent weaponry. That would be great. Plus, of course, significant and impactful sanctions from the entirety of Europe and the United States of America.
There's one thing too. I listened to an aviation expert this morning. He made a very interesting point, which is quite telling for NATO. He said the following, that NATO denies an act of aggression against a country and against NATO itself, supposedly because military targets were not attacked. In other words, according to their logic, if civilian targets are attacked, that is their population, it is not considered an act of aggression. These are the initial points. Second, if they shot them down, how did they know where those drones were headed? It's possible they were actually headed for military targets. In other words, their fear of getting into a confrontation with Russia is so great that they can't even come up with a simple explanation for not responding.
Well, let me tell you, of course, this war has been going on for so many years, 3.5 years with Ukraine. During this time, they certainly could have prepared to shoot down drones, to effectively shoot them down. When they shoot down 4 out of 23, excuse me, but that's a pretty poor result. We shoot them down much more effectively. So something is clearly wrong. It means they're not fully prepared. That's bad. That's bad.
Dmitry, this aviation expert also said this morning that Russia is preparing a foothold for an offensive against NATO countries, specifically from the territory of Belarus. That it's not just conducting military exercises, but is also transporting a huge amount of military equipment, as well as tactical and strategic aviation, into these bunkers on Belarusian territory. So essentially, Belarus will be used as a training ground for further offensive actions. By the way, this is actually very serious.
Well, Dasha, yes, theoretically that's possible, but again, I have to ask, what does Russia have to launch an offensive with? They haven't even been able to take Pokrovsk in a year. So what can they actually attack with? They're already seriously short on people. They've run out of vagrants under the fences, and there are no more tongues left in the prisons either. Even for big money, there are very few people willing to go and die now because a huge number of coffins have come back to Russia, and everyone sees this. A huge number of people have come back from the front without arms or legs, and everyone sees this too. And in general, a huge number of so-called SVO participants have come back home, and they aren't staying silent. They're starting to talk. Both drunk and sober, they're telling stories about how they're driven into assaults, how they're thrown into pits, tied to trees, beaten, and so on. In other words, all the charms of contract service are now well known to everyone in Russia. That's why there's a decrease in the number of people willing to join. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, pretty much all the armor has been wiped out there. They're even running out of donkeys now. What are we even talking about? What are they supposed to attack with? The only thing Russia can attack any country with today is missiles and drones. They've got plenty of that crap.
A quick side question for you. Look, the area of Ukraine and, for example, the area of Estonia, from the perspective of launching an attack, this particular point. No,
The area of which territory? Sorry?
Estonia.
Another one.
Country, we all perfectly understand the size of Ukraine and the size of each of the Baltic countries individually. From Russia's point of view, for an attack. You see, and how long would it take to attack and occupy it?
Well, look, I'll repeat myself again. Russia hasn't been able to take Pokrovsk for a year, even with a large number of troops concentrated there. Yes, I admit that the Estonian army is not as well prepared as the Ukrainian one and lacks experience. But Estonians will fight for their own land. I have no doubt about that. Besides, NATO will obviously help them. Moreover, Estonia has technologies that Russia does not have. In other words, nowadays, it's not necessary to have an advantage in manpower. Today, you need to have an advantage in equipment, in computer technology, and in any other kind of technology. Because it turns out that in the competition between drones and tanks, drones win. Who could have imagined before the start of the full-scale aggression that drones would outperform artillery and tanks?
Admitrig Defense Express reports that the Kremlin had been preparing drone attacks on Poland since July of this year, and many people were aware of this. Polish and Lithuanian SIM cards have already been found in Russian drones, and the Polish intelligence services were aware of this. And here's the question.
Well, I think it's not up to us to answer this question, but rather the Polish intelligence services. And NATO will have to answer this question, and the Americans, of course, as well, because Poland is their favorite child. It's always been that way. And considering the special relationship between Trump and Nawrocki, the new president of Poland, I think this will also be particularly significant. You see, I tend to think that in any case, the Americans and Europeans will get together now and do something really nasty to Russia. You may not believe it, and to be honest, I don't fully believe it myself. I'll be honest, since we're speaking frankly.
Rationally speaking, that question isn't correct either. We're approaching the issue rationally.
Rationally, yes.
Realistically, sanctions, yes, but a military response, absolutely not. That's what we're talking about.
Not necessarily. A military response could be supplying Ukraine with the weapons I mentioned. That would count as a military response because so far they haven't done it. They've been hesitating for some reason. After that, they could say, now our hands are untied. In general, look, the fact that the Russians sent drones to Poland, I think that was an incredible act of stupidity on their part. They basically shot themselves in the foot and in the hand. It's unbelievable stupidity. I actually like this stupidity, but still it's stupidity. At least that's how it seems to me.
Mityok, do you think this action is actually probing to see if Putin will soon attack one of the NATO member countries? That he will do it precisely because he understands there will be no response?
Dasha, there has to be some kind of response, at least once.
Well, consultations 2 weeks, and then what?
Dasha, that's absolutely impossible. If there is truly no response, look, 2 weeks will go by very quickly, and then NATO will
sign off on it. Judging by Trump, Dmytrik, nothing gets through at all.
Then NATO will be signing its own death sentence, and that would mean the defeat of the entire civilized world. But that can't happen. There are Americans in NATO too, so something like that simply can't happen. It's just not possible.
You are incredible, Dmitry Dmitrievich. I'm 200% sure that NATO already signed its own death long ago. Dasha?
I know life. Life is like this. If there's some tough guy in the yard, really tough, and everyone is afraid of him, but then a bold kid comes along, not tough yet, just bold, and at first he provokes the tough guy into an open fight, but the tough guy stays silent. Then the bold kid just walks up and whacks him on the forehead with a stick in front of everyone, and after that, the tough guy isn't so tough anymore. You understand? That's life, Dasha, that's life. Either you're the tough one, and you have to constantly prove how tough you are against all these bold newcomers who keep showing up. There are some crazy ones, Dasha. There are people who, whether because of some defect or something else, aren't afraid of anything. I've seen people like that. But there are people who do things that logically you shouldn't do because you could get hit right away. Someone could even kill you for it, right? But they go for it. They're not afraid. They're that bold, right? And here's the thing. Either they get killed and that's how they're stopped, or they become kings. Will America and Europe really allow Russia to become the king? The question is, well, no, I just know life. I know how things really happen. So I can accept that Russia is reckless, Sure, totally reckless. But to accept that Russia will win? No, I can't. That's out of the question.
Dmitrievich, for me, a meeting between Putin and Trump in Alaska basically means what you just said. Putin has won because he met with the USSR. No, not.
Don't rush, don't rush.
I was just flattering him. But from the perspective of big geopolitics, this should never have happened. It's the legitimization of a war criminal.
Don't rush.
Yes, Dmitrievich. And
what if this is a game? What if Trump wants to play it out to the end and say to the whole world, look, damn it, I've already done everything to end this war. I've even invited this bastard to my place. I've rolled out the red carpet for him, but they just don't understand human language. Well, if you don't understand, then look at what we're doing. Do you rule out such a possibility?
Dmitrievich, it seems to me that everything that's happening from Trump's side is infantilism, immaturity, and a complete lack of understanding of geopolitical processes. If this were Donnie Trump, the wheeler-dealer businessman, the king of New York, who just wanted to meet up with his buddy, excuse me for the lowbrow slang, Vladimir Putin, his pal, they could meet wherever they saw fit, but Donald Trump is not a businessman, not a wheeler-dealer friend, not a buddy from the old days. He is the president of the United States of America, who has certain values and, as I see it, certain responsibilities, because otherwise you shouldn't become president. In my view, Donald Trump is not a mature, infantile, primitive child who is completely unworthy of the title of President of the United States of America. That's my opinion on the matter. Dmitry Lich,
I completely accept your considered opinion and allow for the distinct possibility that you are absolutely right. I do indeed allow for that. Do I personally think you are right? I don't, but it's possible that you are. It's possible.
Meanwhile, while we're having a heated discussion, as always, Dmitry and I are arguing about Trump, the Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs has made a statement. A missile entered Polish territory and its debris has also been found. Dmitry Lich, missiles.
Yes, a missile. Look, as Ostap Bender used to say, you can't just brush off this fact. It's impossible to ignore it. I believe that there are intense consultations going on right now, and I think by tonight we'll see a lot of interesting reactions.
Here you go, by the way. We're reading the news in parallel so we can discuss everything in real time. J.D. Vance, the vice president, has made a statement. Trump does not see any point in economically isolating Russia. He believes that a productive economic agreement with Russia is necessary. So there you have it, Trump's response to us. Vance.
Well, that's what Vance thinks. Don't rush. Trump might say something different, or he might not. You see, Russia truly doesn't stand a chance in this situation anyway. Well, it absolutely doesn't, because the undeniable force of karma ultimately rules over all of us, without exception. Look at what happened to the Keosian Simonian family. What do you think that is? Karma. Karma caught up with them. Because this couple, this pair, is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people on both sides of the war, by the way. On both sides of the war. There's a sea of blood on their hands. And what's happening to them now is karma. It caught up with them. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Everything has already been said for us long ago. Karma will catch up with Russia too, which I think will happen soon. These things happen when you least expect them. When it seems like we'll break through, we'll win no matter what. Oh, how things are going. And suddenly some event like this happens. Someone knocks and says, you owe a debt. And that's it.
Dmitry Ivanovich, you won't believe it. Already 31 drones. They're like mushrooms, as I understood it. You see.
I told you about 23 and you were surprised. Now it's already 31 then. I think
that by tonight it will already be 50. Just so you understand. So that's one missile and 31 drones.
And
by the way, this is according to Polish media reports. And tell me,
can they really leave this unanswered? Well, moreover.
Dmitry Ivanovich, I'm sure that's exactly what will happen. They will leave it unanswered.
All right. Moreover, you said something, Dasha. I think I interrupted you.
Moreover, they wrote that it's 500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. To go that far. 500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border.
That's a lot.
So at the beginning of the night, according to Pelos information, the drone flew in 50 kilometers from the border, from the Ukrainian border. And now, accordingly, it's 500. Dmitry Ivanovich, we're coming back to, let's say, the reaction. Yes, Kaya Kala has already made a statement that there should be economic sanctions. There should be military support for Ukraine, just as you said, and that's absolutely correct. Ukrainian missiles, or more precisely, European or American missiles that will be delivered to Ukraine. But if we return to the topic of sanctions, what do you think? Well, in my opinion, Trump won't impose any additional sanctions on Russia, not secondary ones or anything like that, nor on China. He won't do it. He'll drag things out, well, again, for 2-3 weeks until March, so to speak. And what do you think the European Union will be willing to do after these events, after this missile and drone incident in Poland?
Look, regarding Trump, well, you can't drag things out forever. You can stall for a while. But you can't stop and look ridiculous. You can't just stop. It's dangerous for Trump. That is, I want our viewers to understand an important point. You see, Trump is exposing himself, but that's one thing. He's also exposing the Republican Party. Because in any case, the Republicans will be held accountable. And the Republican lobby is very anti-Russian, and Republicans don't like Russia. Trump's current policy, as we see it today, is a policy of appeasing the aggressor. It might have some, some other options for a short period of time. But if this drags on for too long, and it already has for an incredibly long time, if we're talking about, say, I'll talk to Putin, we get along, he's a good guy, but then he keeps bombing Ukraine after our conversations. But I'll talk to him again. Well, there was another conversation, but he's still bombing, but I'll talk to him again. Look, this can't go on for much longer. This will provoke outrage in Congress, in the Senate, and among ordinary Americans who are, for the most part, anti-Russian. The US leadership might allow Trump's approval ratings to fall, and Americans could start mocking Trump, saying, "What are you, a clown or something? Come on, show some muscle already. Show your strength." He can't be a clown in front of the whole world. He just can't. They won't let him. I want us to truly understand this crucial point. Those powerful individuals and groups who actively sponsor and effectively control the Republican Party simply won't allow him to succeed. He's just the top of the pyramid. He's the apex, but he's not a dictator like Putin or Kim Jong-un. This is a collegial leadership. Yes, he has significant powers. Yes, he says certain things, that's clear, but he can't just keep going on with this talk. You understand? Something needs to be done already, and he'll be forced to take action. Putin is kind of forcing him with his stupid behavior. I'm reminded of Mikhail Zadornov. He once told me, I started reading politicians' last names backwards, from right to left. It turns out great, he said. Look, for example, Chubais becomes Syabuch. He pulled all of Russia onto a voucher and finished it off as Syabuch, he said. Well, exactly, Syabuch. Putin isn't stupid, but here's the question. By the way, Zadornov didn't like Putin. He also told me Putin came to power. It was the year 2000. He loved digging into last names, figuring out where they came from. So where does Putin come from? Putina, that's what. And here he says, not stupid, but we still need to check. So what I want to say is he is stupid. He really is stupid. He's an idiot. Because with these actions, instead of continuing to play along with Trump, he's just pushing Trump to be tougher on Russia. He's pushing him. What? Does he think that after he launched a drone missile at Poland, everyone will just swallow it? No, that's not going to happen. It just won't. It simply can't happen because it's impossible.
Next week, when we meet again, we'll discuss this. If they don't do anything within a week, which I think will be the case, I'm 200% sure that no one will do anything, and I don't even doubt it for a second. Dasha.
Look, I respect your point of view, and I admit that things might turn out the way you say. I admit it. Why not? But everything inside me says that it just can't be like that.
Dmitry, well, in our tandem, you're the incurable eternal optimist. That's clear. You always look at things optimistically, while I'm more down to earth, more sober-minded. And also about
foolishness. It doesn't seem foolish yet, Dasha. When it starts to look foolish, let me know.
Our audience adores you for your optimism, and is always amazed by it. It's incredible. It's a quality. Well, Dmitry, when you said that no one would allow Trump and so on, let's just Well, don't let me fixate on the goal and end up looking like a fool. Let's remember, when are our elections? Midterm elections. That's in 2026. If we follow this logic, then most likely we shouldn't expect any serious actions until 2026, because in 2026, the Republicans will probably lose on all fronts. And when the Democrats come in, that's when more substantial support for Ukraine will begin and possibly some new developments. That's what the Republicans tell me on my broadcast. Do you agree with this? This is a question.
I can agree with this, of course. I can agree. And this is possible. And it is possible that the Republicans will not help Ukraine specifically. There were Republicans, there was President Biden. He seems to be well disposed towards Ukraine, right? Democrat. 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 Yes, a Democrat. They died. There were still no weapons. There weren't enough shells, not enough ammunition. There was nothing. And the Democrats were in power then. It's a double-edged sword, if you can even call it a sword. But I still think that, no, it can't go on like this any longer.
Mitrik, do you remember all our European partners kept naming new dates, Christmas, and then the Chinese New Year? You already told everyone that there would be no ceasefire before Christmas. Mitrik, if we speak realistically without any illusions, we must clearly understand that we are in a period of protracted war with the Russian aggressor. And the only point I would like us to discuss is the massive increasing strikes on our country's territory. I specifically went through all the analytics. That is, since Trump came to power, Putin has started striking Ukrainian territory much more intensively and ruthlessly. The number of drones increased to 800, even up to 1,000. And the regularity of these attacks is incredible. And all the Western experts have already written that Trump has encouraged Putin to attack Ukraine. Mitrik, this is the harsh reality. These are, as they say, not just words, but facts. What are we supposed to do about this?
Dasha, but Putin's tactics are clear and obvious. It means he can't take the territory by military means. You can see it yourself. He's just bogged down. There are no successes. So what does he do? He does exactly what Gurulyov or Zhuravlyov let slip about a year or a year and a half ago on Russian television. They're all the same there, a bunch of alcoholics. But he's the deputy chairman of the State Duma Defense Committee, I think, a general. So what did he say? He said this: we don't even need to capture Kharkiv with armed forces. We absolutely need to strike at Kharkiv's essential energy infrastructure, specifically targeting the main collectors, and indeed at everything vital, so that the city of Kharkiv is completely left without water, without heat, without proper heating, and without any electricity whatsoever. So that, he says, the people of Kharkiv will leave for Western Ukraine by car, by bus, on foot, by wagon, and then we will enter this city and take it over. That's the plan. That's their tactic. Since we can't capture Pokrovsk, for example, right? Since we can't achieve results through assaults, can't get the outcome we want, then, well, let's starve them out. Let's use genocide against them. Let's make it so that in winter they have nothing, so that they get up and leave on their own, vacating the cities for us. That's Putin's tactic. That's why he carries out such strikes. Notice, on energy, on everything. But we're not just sitting on our hands either. We've already triggered a gasoline crisis in Russia by striking their oil refineries. We did that. So I think, yes, there will be these kinds of mutual strikes.
Mitrik, do you think that Donald Trump and his attitude toward Putin and Russia stimulated these strikes? In essence, Trump is giving Putin his blessing to strike because Putin sees that there will be no punishment. Yeah, even more so, as some might say, even more, and they even invited Valyaska, and there you could say they bowed down, lowered themselves, and all that.
Well, yes, what? They didn't bow down? Just look. Pay attention to the details. We need to pay attention to the details. Trump had a wide red carpet. Putin had a narrow red carpet. Pay attention to the video. Notice the airplanes that were parked around those carpets. Notice the planes flying overhead. These are all signs. These are signs that you are nobody. And just look around, look at the carpet, take a look at everything at once. It's the same here. You can't say for sure, but you can see these signs with the naked eye, right? I think I have a feeling that things just can't go on like this, you know? I'm absolutely calm about it. I believe that things can't go on like this. Europe and America are just going to rebel soon. But if they don't rebel, well, listen, then terrorism defeats democracy, defeats civilization, and that's it. That's the end. That's when we just throw in the towel. But I'm sure it won't come to that.
Dmitry, what do you think if today we have this issue? For example, we see that we're not launching enough drones over Russian territory. We discussed this with a lot of military analysts. So what's happening? Now we're talking about ourselves and our work, not about our partners. That is, today Russia can attack Ukraine with more than 800 drones and ballistic missiles. With impunity. Moreover, drones are attacking the center of Kyiv, the cabinet of ministers, and this drone terror is killing women and children. But this is already an outrageous situation. This is terror. What should Ukraine do to prevent this from happening? Most likely, it should powerfully strike the places where these drones are being amassed, and possibly demonstratively openly attack Russia, St. Petersburg, other major cities, military targets, with 800 drones as well. The question is, why aren't we doing this now?
Well, the answer is, we aren't doing this because we don't have that kind of capacity, because we don't have that kind of money, because it takes a lot of money. Russia, as you can see, is spending money on the war without restraint. We, on the other hand, depend on the West. We're given money just to keep our budget afloat, and for the war as well. We don't have that kind of money. That's the difference. But I hope there will be more.
Dmitry, and to wrap up, of course, everyone is asking, given the current circumstances, and your opinion is important here, will our European partners deploy military contingents to the territory of Ukraine? Because Peskov just made a statement literally right now saying that they did not attack Poland and that the deployment of foreign troops to Ukraine is fraught with terrible destructive consequences for NATO. And all countries will understand this soon.
By the way, the fact that they send drones to Poland is also a warning, like, watch out, don't send a military contingent. Undoubtedly, this is also a sign, and what Peskov just said confirms all of this. My conviction is that not a single European country, including the US, will send its troops to Ukraine before a peace agreement is signed. That's what I believe. Although anything is possible, we see what an interesting world we live in. What was impossible yesterday is possible today. Who sang that? I know for sure that the impossible is possible.
Yes, we remember. Who sang that? Yes, let's not name names.
So, who sang it? I don't remember.
The main gay of the Russian Federation.
There are a lot of them, so who is it? Let's...
The Quest, the talented Dima Bilan.
Dima Bilan sang it.
Those ones. Russia, a country that is against being gay, yet at the top of its musical Olympus are nothing but representatives of non-traditional sexual orientation. That's all you need to know about this country.
I remembered an incident with him, but, well, I won't tell it.
When you say that, our audience gets really intrigued. Was it you and him in the same room, somehow communicating?
It was at the grand and memorable 45th birthday party of Philip Kirkorov, a truly special occasion. This was before the big war in Moscow at Sophie's, with all the stars of Russian and Ukrainian pop music in attendance. And Dima Bilan, apparently after sniffing something quite potent, came out to sing with his pants completely pulled down, revealing his entire backside. His whole butt was clearly showing for everyone to see. And one very famous and renowned artist said, Lesia, please walk carefully behind Dima and provide cover for him from the back, as it is quite dangerous here. There, I just remembered then.
Friends, with Dmitry Malicho, you always find out some kind of total trashy exclusive that you simply couldn't have known otherwise. Dmitry, to wrap things up, we always ask you to say a few words at the end of each stream for our audience. It's very important.
Friends, karma will catch up with everyone. Everyone will answer for everything. The past cannot defeat the future. It's impossible. An anti-civilization cannot defeat civilization. It's impossible. So despite temporary difficulties, we still know that the outcome will be very good for us. There are no other options. Well, at least I don't see any other options.
Yes, friends, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. We will definitely win. Dimitro Gordon, Dimitro, thank you very much and see you next week. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Dasha, thank you.